All right, everybody, welcome back to the Millennial Sales Podcast. This is your host, Tommy Tahoe Alemo. We're at episode 262. It is Wednesday, November 10th. Getting excited for the holidays, getting excited for the end of year push, the time of the year where we can really make our accelerators, our extra commission. This is the show where young salespeople come to get to the next level of their career, find the next job, close more deals, get the promotion, whatever it might be. That's what we're here to do, and we're here to help with. Got a great episode today. Got Wayne Morris coming on. He is formerly the quote-unquote donut boy. We'll get to that. Turned two-time CRO. He's a sales leader. He's been a sales leader at multiple different companies, two-time CRO, four-time sales leader. Really well-renowned consultant in the SaaS world. And he gets into some great stories with us today, talking about door-to-door sales in Australia, talking about the mindset shift that he made. Very similar to last week when I talked to Kara Feldman of going from, kind of this, wishy-washy mentality or this failure mentality and this failure state to, it's like the light switch goes off and makes a complete mental shift, and it completely changes the trajectory of his career and his life. And I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Before we get to that, let's do two shout outs. First of all, for this podcast, I appreciate you listening. It's a free podcast, but if you could just show some love wherever you're listening, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever it might be, if you just hit the subscribe button. If you are an Apple, if you leave a 5-star review, all that stuff should take you 30 seconds, but it really does make an impact on the success of this show and who we can get on and the reach of trying to help other people. So I appreciate you. I'm Tom Alemo on LinkedIn, Tommy Tahoe on Instagram and Twitter. You can reach out and check me out there as well. The sponsor of this podcast is Postal.io. Postal helps create curated marketing experiences. Essentially, they help you bridge the gap with the relationship with your customers through the different gifts that you can send them, right? So it could be as simple as a Starbucks gift card, help kind of break the ice on an intro call. It could be something as lavish as a wine tasting with all of your key prospects, right? You could send them a bottle of wine from the local winery. You could send them something from the local florist. It is in the remote world where we're not taking clients out as much or maybe not at all. It's the great way to bridge the gap and create a great relationship with your customers. So highly recommend checking them out at postal.io. Without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Wayne. Let's go. All right. Now on to the Millennial Sales Podcast. We got the former quote-unquote donut boy to the two-time CRO, four-time sales leader, and current strategic advisor in the SaaS world, Wayne Morris. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom. It's a real pleasure to finally get on your show. I've listened to a lot of them, and it's a real privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First things first, we'll shout out DZ for the intro, a mutual friend of ours and another listener of the show, actual creator of the original podcast artwork. I don't know if you knew that, but he that's how we met. And he helped me out with some of the artwork and we became friends for the last few years.
Yeah, he's a great guy, DZ. Big fan.
So we have a lot of ground to cover, Wayne. Before we get into all of the different things from your sales career and what you're doing today, every time I see you post on LinkedIn, I see the donut emoji pop up. That's like your trademark now. So like talk to me and talk to the guests. Like, what does donut boy mean? Were you selling donuts or you were like the intern that got donuts? What was that all about?
Yeah, a lot of people, it's funny. So many people comment on that headline on LinkedIn, and most people get it wrong. And the people that get it wrong, I know, haven't like dug deep. They're just like the surface level dudes.
Yeah.
And they assume I used to sell donuts. I've never sold a donut in my life. But for anyone that's in sales and is used to some sales slang, they'll understand that if you land a donut, that means you have done no deals, you have no revenue on the board, you have a big fat zero on the board, which is what the donut looks like on my profile. So one of my very first experiences in sales was an unmitigated disaster for the first 2 weeks. It was a really rough experience. And I would literally come back into the office each day. It was an MLM, multi-level marketing play, 100% commission knocking on doors. And yeah, Wayne, have you got any sales today? No, I haven't. Okay, next day, Wayne, you have any sales? No, I haven't. And then after a while, it was like, okay, here comes Donut Boy. And that was, and yeah, that was pretty much my initiation into sales. And yeah, I got a little bit better from that point, but those first 2 weeks I looked very deep into my soul, and one way or another, I figured it out. But that's how I got the nickname Donut Boy.
Okay. So I want to cover some ground on the door-to-door sales, but before we get there, I saw, somewhere in your profile, I think you mentioned that you came from a military family, I think first in your family to go to university. And I feel like that probably leads us to why you got into sales. I'd hate to be assumptive, but everyone seems to have a pretty interesting sales story. It's not what you probably grow up wanting to be or aspiring to be, or even know that it exists. And a lot of us get in difficult or weird circumstances. So what was kind of like the leading point to you getting into the sales world?
Yeah, so you're correct. I come from a military family back in the UK. So we're low income, and money was it never felt difficult to come by as a kid, but it was clearly obvious it was. My parents were making really big sacrifices, and as I got older, I saw that more and more. We had less than other kids have, and so on and so forth. And before long, I equated having money to having freedom, and I was really motivated to make money in order to have the freedom that it's clear that my parents weren't clearly afforded, and that was compounded in my first job in London when it was a marketing job at a company called Reuters, and the company would sell trading platforms into city traders in London. It was compounded there because I realized that the sales guys made all the money, and I realized that they drove the fast cars, they wore the nicest suits, and they had the nicest meals. And to be frank, I wanted a piece of that action. That's what I looked at that and I was like, I'd like that. That looks pretty good. So I worked really hard in my first 6 months in that job in marketing to afford myself the opportunity to spend a bit more time with the sales guys. And when I spent a little bit more time with the sales guys, I realized that I really enjoyed what they were doing, which was going out and meeting customers in the city and convincing them that the product that they were selling was something that they needed. And that was my that was kind of my first introduction to sales before the knocking on doors in Australia. And what I realized was, this is back in '98, is that these guys were earning £100,000, like 130. Well, in those days that would have been $200,000, but like in today's money, it's like $130,000. But back in 1998, so maybe equates to like $500,000 plus at this point in time, and it seemed achievable. And to me, it seemed like a really smart way to game the system, to go from nothing to something really quickly. And I just equated cash to freedom, and I wanted to find the fastest route to make the most money possible. And sales, there just I couldn't see any other way there that made sense. I could go study law for 4 years. I could go off and do something else for a number of years, but I wanted to get there really, really quickly. And I felt like sales was the great leveler. And if I could prove that I could sell a product, then my pitch would be simple. It'd be like, hey, look, I'm a money machine. I literally make you a load of cash, and you're going to have to pay me in return for that. It was a pretty straightforward quid pro quo setup. Was my interpretation of sales. I just wanted a piece of that action. So for a very long time, that was how I thought. I just thought, I just want to I want to get into sales. I want to prove myself, and I just want to sell bigger and bigger deals. So that that was that was my way of breaking out of how I had grown up in a low-income family.
And so you get into this multi-level marketing situation in Australia, going door to door, 100% commission. You're the donut boy. You're racking up zeros pretty frequently. And 21-ish years later, we're talking here, and you've been a two-time CRO. You've been a sales leader at a bunch of different companies. You're advising, some of the fastest growing companies in the world. So what was that turning point for you that early in your career that, a lot of donut boys probably end up going to do a completely different job? They don't make it in sales. They don't stick with it. So what was it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a number of things. First was just pride. I mean, no one likes having a moniker of something that's really negative hung around their neck, and certainly not me. So that needed to be removed. So there's one of two things you can do. You can run away from that and you can make excuses, or you can buckle down and just get on with it. And that's what I did. So firstly, it was pride, and then in order to get on with it, you have to have some grit and determination. And I knew I was never short of that. I mean, there was, something I've always had is this desire to succeed and this desire to go the extra mile to succeed. And I still have that today. And I feel blessed to have been born with that. So I think there are some innate things that you just have as an individual. I think that sales guys have, the good ones have, as they're either born with or they develop, or they have bosses that encourage them to lean into it. And I certainly had that. I think the biggest thing beyond that was just an inquisitiveness to figure out what it was I was doing wrong, because everyone was operating off scripts. And everyone was going to the door, running these. No one was knocking on more doors than me. It wasn't a volume issue. It was something else. And I was just intrigued. I mean, part of me self-reflected and was like, how am I so shit at this? This is what the fuck? I look at myself in the mirror and be like, how am I so shit? I have never been so shit at anything in all my life. And I am terrible at this. And so there was some level of intrigue, some kind of perverse intrigue. And then I got to work. And then I really got to work. I then said, right, I'm going to figure this out. So the first thing I did was I hated the scripts. The scripts meant they were just such BS, man. I was like, maybe they work for you, but the conclusion I came to is they just don't work for me.
Yeah.
And what do I have to lose at this point? At this point, you're supposed to religiously follow these scripts. At this point, I have nothing to lose. I've tried following the scripts. I've tried doing what everyone else does. For whatever reason, it doesn't work for me. So maybe I'm different, and because I'm different, I'm gonna have to operate differently. So I did. I literally went completely off piste. And I thought around the subject with my own brain. And the first thing I thought was, what is this product really? And who does it, how does it provide value? And it was telecom. It was anyone that made telephone calls internationally. If you use this product, you would reduce your call rate significantly. So the first thing I did was look at the product and figure out whether I believed it or not. And I did. And then I subscribed to it myself in my own rented home in Sydney, Australia. And I used it myself to call home. And I looked at my phone bills and I was like, yeah, okay, this is legit, but only if I make a whole load of calls. So I was pretty clear that actually I was the ideal customer profile. So then it was okay, so if it works for me, it can work for others. I need to go find people that are in a somewhat similar position to me and make a good amount of international calls. There's Australia, as former British colony. There's going to be a lot of people back in the UK they're calling, but also New Zealand and other places. So I got into the mind's eye of my buying audience for the very first time. Prior, I'd just been selling the product. But now what I was doing was figuring out how I could provision value to that buyer by illustrating to them that clearly, like whether it made sense to them or it didn't. And it was a really important shift because I now knew. Prior, I was just trying to sell to everybody. But the big shift now was I wasn't trying to sell to everybody. The big shift now was I knew who this was relevant for, and I had to go find out a lot about the person on the door before I tried to sell them something. It was a small but absolutely pivotal shift in the psychology of the way in which I approached the door and the content of the conversation that I would have with the buyer. So now I would approach the door, and once I'd made someone comfortable, which obviously has to happen in kind of milliseconds, I was really in question mode. Is this relevant for you? And I had to find out a lot about them, and they got talking, and I just shut up. That for me is something that has stuck with me to this day. It's really got nothing to do with you when you're out selling. It literally has nothing to do with you. If you can if you can provision value, you have a shot. But the only way you know if you can provision value is if you can understand what's on the other side of the table. Once I'd figured that out, it was just a breeze and actually became enjoyable. I broke all records in New South Wales. I made a load of cash. It was literally night and day, literally night and day. I've not looked back from that point, but I hear a lot of people don't put. You did some MLM stuff. Do you still have it on your resume?
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
It's on my LinkedIn. It's on my resume. I don't think I would be where I am as a salesperson without that experience personally.
Yeah, likewise. But I hear a lot of people that just don't want to talk about it, take it off their resume, and I'm like, what? Like, I could talk to you for ages about that. Like, we should be talking about that stuff. And to me, even now, like 20 plus years on, I'm certain that the lessons that I learned on those doors, I'm still using today.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And that's the thing that when I mentor people that are, in college or want to transition to sales, or maybe they're, family members or something. I always recommend the first step being something like that. Like I did Cutco. A lot of the listeners know that. I think Enterprise Rent-A-Car has a really good sales training. I think some people do like vacuum cleaners or things like. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but that type of experience I think is unquestionably really helpful. I've had a lot of guests on the podcast just so happen to have done some sort of multi-level marketing, knocking on the door, that type of environment as their first sales job. And, they all credit, some of their success to that. So I think there's something to be said about it for sure.
Yeah. And some of the best salespeople, or some of the best sales trained people out there, I think came from the printing world, like Canon, Epson, those guys. They used to have a really strong training program.
Xerox.
Xerox, those guys. Literally, you're going into offices and you're selling like hardware printers, and that's not, I'm sure they were getting paid a salary, but you can see why you need to have really solid training there. And this is a tangent and we're shooting forwards now, but when I see incredible product-led growth companies emerging in SaaS, one thing that really kills me is, you've got this incredible product-led growth company, you have SDRs who are taking the leads from marketing and really giving salespeople a layup. It's like a tap-in. And part of me is like, dude, what have you actually got to do at this point? Relative to, I know that they have to do a good amount, but relative to I guess, what some of the old school sales guys had to do. It's really very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think nowadays sales is there's so many different like types of roles too, and at different companies that, I mean, I don't know what it was like 20 years ago, but it just feels like it's really hard to say, it's hard to compare roles between different companies, right? Like you've got, one of my pet peeves that I see, maybe this is just me, but I see like people have like director of sales titles. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, how many people do you manage? And they're like, oh, no, I rep account, I'm just a rep. They're like, okay, so you're an AE, or whatever it might be. It's just not transferable to every company. And like you say, some companies it's a layup to sell, but maybe you have to sell a huge volume, or some it's just you're the first rep and it's an absolute grind. But if you can get like one or two in the door, then you hit your number. And it's really, I feel like that's probably something really challenging with hiring salespeople, is that the history can be probably pretty foggy, but you almost have to hire a lot on characteristics of people, in my opinion, right? Like their grit that you mentioned earlier, their coachability, their intelligence, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, those soft skills, I guess you'd call those soft skills, and their EQ are absolutely critical in any sales hire. Without that stuff, I just don't know how I don't know how you can succeed. What's interesting when I recently wrote an article about this on my blog. When you go back in time to when SaaS first emerged, there were no SDRs. It was like full cycle sales in the enterprise, right? And then you hit 99 into 2000, Salesforce is born, the word SaaS is coined, and then you've got SDRs coming into the mix, because what you don't want are these full cycle sales guys doing all the lead processing and qualification. You want them in the field. You want them in the field out there selling as best they can, up and down across, if it's enterprise sales. But then as SaaS emerged, what you saw was like really incredible products being built that were product led in their growth strategy. And I think a lot of what has happened is that you've seen in the enterprise, it's pretty easy to justify an SDR, often a sales engineer, and maybe something else. You can often justify that. The cost of sale can typically sustain that, and the payback period will still be over the course of still within about 12 months. As you come further down and the ACV, or the average sale price, begins to drop, it does get harder and harder. In some companies, like I think we've got to a point. You take a product that costs a few K a year. Like, do you really need SDRs in that role, or can you just have full cycle salespeople? Sometimes that friction point is just very difficult to justify. But in the background, what you have are fundamentals in the business that it's kind of growth at all costs. So I think a lot of founders lose sight of those fundamentals, and I think the challenge for AEs in that situation is, like, what is it that you're actually doing, and how are you actually polishing your sales skills, and are you improving as a salesperson? Because if what's actually happening is marketing is doing an incredible job to provision marketing qualified accounts or sales qualified opportunities, the SDRs are doing an incredible job to pretty much like have a deal on a plate for an AE, then like, what is it an AE is doing?
Right.
And if the AE doesn't have to do much, that might be fine by the AE, right? They're going to like hit their goal. They're going to smash their goal. They're going to hit 100%. They're going to have 8 quarters of hitting goal after goal. But if they want to move company and they want to step up, maybe into the enterprise, what they're going to find is there could be a huge chasm. So they either need to be in a company that understands that there's that gap and supports them with sales training and career development, so that that chasm doesn't exist. or they just need to do some of that stuff themselves, because there is a gap that's emerging there, I think, and you're seeing a lot of people that do want to step up in deal value struggle and take their time. I mean, and of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with product-led growth or SMB firms, but the motion is really different as you move up. Maybe you do want to stay down in the product-led growth SMB kind of arena, which is challenging unto itself for very different reasons. But if you do want to step up, then you just need to be very sure that you're polishing your sales skills on a day-by-day basis, and not, I understand that you might be getting some tap-ins, but you need to spend the time brushing up your pure sales skills if you want to move up.
Do most of the companies that you advise and work with, are they mostly more high velocity? Are they larger enterprise deals? Maybe it's a combo, or do you have a specialty that you kind of is your forte?
Yeah, good question. I tested myself in a product-led growth firm called Guidebook. That was the firm that actually brought me to the US from the UK for 6 years, and we grew from 2 million to 15 million in ARR. And I really enjoyed it. The culture of the company, the product was incredible. The thing I found most challenging was the velocity. I think the high volume sales is just not for everybody. As CRO, I was just in awe of the salespeople that were, and the SDRs and the customer success folk that were just, having 20 or 30 conversations with prospects and customers every single day.
Wow.
Like that to me is, you have to be wired in a certain way to do that. And I was in awe of them every day, which hopefully that meant that I was a good leader because I respected everything that they did. But I was always very transparent. I was like, I could never see myself doing that as an individual contributor. It's just not the way my brain is wired. So and in fact, what I was trying to do in a Guidebook, and eventually we were successful in doing it to some extent, was the product was so good. I just saw big opportunities to move up market into the enterprise. I saw real application at scale with just minor degrees of separation with where the product was today. So I was always trying to look for avenues into the enterprise. And what I discovered about myself through my career was I just really enjoy having conversations about disruptive new technologies in the C-suite. Even in publicly traded companies, it's just an environment that I'm very comfortable in. I read around my subjects a lot. I read S1s, I read shareholder reports, I read all of the financial media. So I'm really kind of hanging out with all of the CEOs and have been pretty much my whole career. So I love having conversations about technology that can move a share price. So I naturally lean in that direction but I've been focused on SaaS, right? So where I would describe my forte as being is, yes, of course I can do and have done successfully growth of an SMB product-led growth company, but it's not my passion. My passion and my forte is really either starting a new line of business in a product-led growth or SMB firm that needs and wants to move into the enterprise, or in early stage SaaS companies that have a focus on the enterprise. And for me, the enterprise is at least a 50K ACV, but probably more like 100K plus and into the millions.
So, I think something that as reps start to move into the enterprise, right, and they start to build their career and get to that point where they're sitting in the room with some pretty important people and they're talking about these 6 or 7 figure deals, that it's intimidating. And I think a key skill is having the executive presence to, hold your own and be able to run that meeting, right? And be able to run that deal effectively. So it probably doesn't feel, it probably feels fun and like a big, not a big deal for you because you've been doing it for so long and you've got the titles to match and there's kind of that like mutual respect there. But for, an AE that's listening that maybe is considering or has, started selling to the enterprise and maybe feels like their executive presence game isn't as strong as it could be? What tips would you give them?
Yeah. So if I take a step back in time and I recall my first interactions in the C-suite, I was shitting myself. I sweaty palms. Like I would be up the night before, not sleep well. I mean, I get it, so I hear it, and I don't want to be an idiot about it and suggest that that's not a real thing. It is, but there's a couple of things you need to think about. The first is you have to find ways to control your emotions, because whichever way you cut it, like if you're not in control of your emotions going into these high-powered, like potentially pivotal meetings, and let's be clear about this. In the enterprise, you can make your year on one deal. You can make your year and then some on one deal. Mm-hmm. But you can't go into these meetings thinking like that. You can't go into these meetings thinking, this CEO's all over Forbes. This CEO's always on MSNBC. This CEO is like a fucking god, a superstar. Like, you need to be going into those meetings thinking, this guy uses the bathroom every day, just like me. This guy has to change diapers every day, just like me. This guy, whatever, anything that normalizes the person that you're going to meet is really, really healthy. And I advise anyone to do it. Now, whatever floats your boat, you need to find a way to just get that conversation on a level. You're basically the same. You're both humans. You both do your stuff every day, and you need to get it on that level, because that's how that person is thinking typically, unless they're an asshole like that person, and they're probably not at that level. Like they're not going to give you time unless it's going to be a good use of their time. And they would have thought about that. So that's what that person will be thinking as well. So you've got to find ways to just be calm and normalize the situation, even if it's not normal. That's one thing. But if all you do is that, and you go into that meeting, then you're winging it.
Yep.
And you can't do that. You will get found out real quick. So there is so much information out there about both companies and people. You just have to do the work. And for me, doing the work was reading S1s, reading company reports, reading shareholder letters, looking up the news on that company that has, whatever has come out in the last 2 weeks. So I could be really, really contemporary. I had to have these really firm anchors that would build my credibility fast. So I'd reference things in the S1. I'd reference something in the previous shareholder meeting that would relate to why this meeting is relevant or could be relevant. But it was really just about, creating rapport. I mean, the first level is like, is this person even going to respect who I am? Yep. So, and then am I calm, and can I have because if you're starstruck, it's never going to work. So, can I create rapport fast? How do I do that? I've got to build credibility, and that's both both on a personal and professional level. So I would do things like, I remember reading one CEO was like, I'd got to the point in my career about 10 or 11 years ago where I was leading a pretty successful company in London. But this was a big deal, and like I was going with my guys, but I got to the point in my career where I stopped wearing ties. It's like, okay, I'll wear the suit, but I'm not going to wear a tie. Sod that. Yeah. But I'd read that this CEO, for some reason, he'd actually published in an article that like he has deep respect for sales guys that try and sell him something if they're really well turned out. I don't know why, but he made it very clear that if you're well turned out, like for him, it's like you're making a really big effort, and he really values that.
Yeah.
If I hadn't done that research, I'd just turned up as I am now, and his first impression would have been different. As it was, I did the research, I turned up with a tie, and we get off on the right foot. And all that, I meet him for the first time, I smile, shake his hands, and the first question I ask is, I hear you like ties. And then he's like, straight away, he's like, he knows that it's, he knows I've diffused the situation because I've made a joke. He knows immediately I've read that article, and he knows immediately that I've shown him respect by wearing a tie. And then I've broken the ice by having a conversation about where the tie is from.
Yeah.
And it was a nice tie. So we could, so we did. We had a 5-10 minute conversation about the tie. And then I'm on a level. And I was with guys earlier in their career, and they're watching this. And we get off and we do a deal, and it's a good deal. And we're still friends today, actually. If you're listening, Steve Robinson, I'll never forget reading that article. So yeah.
Shout out to Steve. That's awesome. That's great. I wanted to touch on, you've made some pretty major life changes in the last, half dozen or so years. I don't know exactly when you moved from the UK to the US, but moving there, going off of the very nice W-2 that I'm sure you've been receiving as a CRO, and going off on your own and doing, a lot of different advising and, investing and things like that. So maybe you could walk me through the mentality of after 2 decades or nearly 2 decades of success, now like taking more steps to continue to kind of put yourself in new uncomfortable positions.
Yeah, good question. I was about to say my wife has heart attacks every time that I make these moves, but actually she's ultra supportive. Look, I think the thing is like I've just been a lifelong learner, and I get bored pretty quickly, and I'm really inquisitive, and I'm prepared to challenge myself. So, moving to the US, we moved here. I made the decision to move here when my wife was 6 months pregnant with our second child, and she thought I was joking at first, and then she realized that I wasn't, and we made the decision to have the baby in London and then come to the US post the birth when he was 3 months old. But we knew no one in the US apart from the company that I was working for, and that was a huge move. And we got to the US, and it was challenging because we couldn't find a school to put my daughter into that we thought was good for her. And so we made this decision for my wife to give up her career and become a single income family in the Bay Area. So anyone that is living in the Bay Area will know how difficult that is, whether you're a CRO or not. And it was challenging, but the thing is, for me, is like the Bay Area is if you're in tech, it's like the Premier League of tech. I mean, so why would I love London. It's like really my hometown. Love it to bits. But if I'm going to look back on my life and I'm going to, have no regrets, I need to have given it a good shot in the mecca of tech. So I'd been coming here on and off for the previous 15 years anyway with my companies. And every time I got back on that flight, I was pretty sad. I'd get back on the flight and I was like, wow, I just love the energy and the vibe of the Bay Area.
Yeah.
There's just something about it. There's just something about, I know it gets a lot of flack nowadays, but there's just something about it. There's just something in the water that has people thinking differently and believing in the impossible. And that always resonated with me. And I'm not saying in London and in Europe there isn't that, but it's just not to the level that it is here. So I was just intrigued. I was like, I wonder how I'll fare if I go to the Bay Area. So that brought me here. And I have to say, it was strange. I got here and I just didn't skip a beat. It was like I'd never spent actually that much time in the city of San Francisco. I was always on the peninsula when I was coming over. Yeah. But I didn't skip a beat. I loved it. What I'd been doing in the background as a sales leader was in my company prior to Guidebook. Guidebook was the company that brought me here. My company prior to Guidebook, Maximizer, which sold for around 180 million to Oracle. And then in my company post Guidebook Wonderschool, which is an A16Z backed marketplace, I had been developing playbooks for my teams so that I could scale companies successfully. And what I'd so there's one other key point of note here is every company I have joined, I've had zero experience of the sector. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, every single company I've moved from and to, I've not had any experience in the sector. And I've always believed that you should hire functional expertise over industry expertise. And I was proving that out. So I had been proving that to myself and proving it out in the field for a decade. Yeah. So when I helped turn Wonderschool around, build a new line of business from zero to a couple of $1 million and a $10 million plus pipeline right in the heart of the pandemic. So when I'd done that within 12 months, the reason I turned my back on the W-2 and started my own boutique consultancy was really simple. I had worked out that the value that I was providing my companies, I could probably distill down to 10, maybe 15 hours a week of my time. And the rest of my time was spent in meetings that I probably shouldn't be in, doing things I probably shouldn't be doing, not in front of customers that I'd rather and should really be in front of, just doing things that really wasn't provisioning value for what I was hired to do. It was like, I guess it was like, if you hire, and I want to use the right analogy so I don't sound like a douchebag, but I'm struggling. So I apologize. You can all call me a douchebag. But if you hire an F1 driver to drive an Formula One car, don't get them driving a truck in their spare time, because they're not going to be happy about it. And that's the same for leaders, ICs, get them focused on the stuff that really gets them going.
Yep.
But it's the same across all companies, right? I'm not calling out any one of my previous companies. It's this, you see this across every single company. But what I'd done differently is I created these frameworks that I knew applied across different companies. And I was convinced that I could provision the same value that I was getting paid a CRO salary for across 3 or 4 companies at the same time. And I tested this out. Doing small side hustles with startups, pro bono for free. And then when I tried to stop doing those side hustles for free, those founders came back to me and said, no, don't stop. This is your market rate. We would pay you this. Would you continue? And when I did the math, and then I added on the freedom and the desire to run my own company and all those other extra benefits that are somewhat intangible, it was just a complete no-brainer. I'd actually make more money. But more importantly, I'd have the freedom to build my own company and run things under my own steam. So when I turned to my wife and ran this by her, she was super supportive. And then, so in March, April of this year, I went it alone, and really fortunate to have 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7 in the next couple of weeks, clients who are all doing diverse stuff, from crypto to ed tech to enterprise software. All have the same problem. They all want to grow faster. They all want to move into the enterprise, or they want to accelerate enterprise. And I'm really proud to be by their sides, helping these founders, CEOs, and sales leaders get to where they want to get to. That's
awesome. Let me hit you with a few rapid fire questions here, Wayne, before I let you take off for the evening. So I see some books behind you. We're huge learners on this podcast. I'm curious if you have any books that either have been really impactful for you throughout your career, or any good ones that you've read in the last 6 months. Any topic is fair game. It doesn't have to be sales related, but it can.
The book that had the biggest impact on there's loads of great books out there, and I've got a few of them there, but this one, for those that are watching on YouTube,
Subscribe on YouTube.
is Proactive Selling by Skip Miller. who I recently connected. I was talking about like being starstruck. I was actually starstruck when Skip connected with me, accepted my connection on LinkedIn. This book, I think I read it when he first published it back in the early 2000s. This was the book that made me realize I wanted to be in enterprise sales and not in lower value sales. So that was a pivotal book. Buy it, read it. It's really powerful. And then, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, like that age-old classic. I mean, there aren't many books that you can just pick up and every time you read it, you just like learn something new, or you get reminded of something that's so impactful and so powerful. Yep. If you're a sales guy and you haven't read that book, or you don't have it on a shelf that you can reference like I have back there, you're just selling yourself short. Like you can perform better if you have access to that book. So, get a hold of it. And a great read and a fun read is The Hard Thing About Hard Things, I think it's called. Yep. The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. I love that. I love that book. He charts his time building out his first company with Andreessen, and I mean, there's just so much in that book that is just so awesome and cool. So that's a good one too.
That's a great one. All right, Wayne, what's bumping through your Spotify, your Apple Music playlist, wherever you listen to music? What's been going on in the headphones recently?
Oh, music. Oh man, you've got me. Oh man. Okay. So that's a good question, actually. I thought I'd be stumped on that. Metallica have released their Blacklist, which is Metallica's album, Metallica was all covers. And if any of you haven't listened to Miley Cyrus's cover of Nothing Else Matters, like, get out there and listen to it. Wow. That girl has the most incredible range on her voice. That is like, she nails it, man. So Metallica, The Blacklist, all covers, but go listen to Miley Cyrus sing Nothing Else Matters. And then we've become big fans of this guy called me and my wife have become big fans of this guy called the Polish Ambassador. Have you heard of him?
No, but I like the name.
Yeah, he's like, he's this cool, like, house DJ, made a name for himself at Burning Man. I think he's gone there a number of times. We've never been to Burning Man. We want to go, but his music is very different to Metallica. I have very eclectic music taste, but we've been listening a lot to the Polish Ambassador.
I love it. I'll have to check that one out. Any other resources, people that you follow either on LinkedIn, or I don't know if you listen to other podcasts or YouTube channels or anything like that. Any other places that you go to get your learning on?
Yeah, I'm a huge podcast listener. I'm just actually looking at my phone right now. And I'm big into crypto, so I listen to a lot of crypto podcasts.
Hit me with the crypto knowledge. Hit me with the crypto podcasts.
Oh yeah, well, Decrypt Daily and the CoinDesk podcast network. Yep. Those two are the two that I listen to most. I'm big into I'm big into investing. Obviously, big into startups. So this week in startups, the Jason Calacanis show, the All In podcast, Chamath, Sachs, and Freeberg and Calacanis. That's actually probably my favorite show right now. They're funny. They are funny. And then I mean, a load of others, but those are the ones that I'm listening to. Oh, I'm big into this guy called Ben Greenfield. Have you heard of him?
He's like the fitness guy, yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of big into biohacking. This is an Aura ring that you see on my ring. So I'm kind of big into like sleep tracking, diet, biohacking. So Greenfield, he's an interesting character, but like there's a lot of good stuff amongst all the other stuff. So, and then there's you, and you're there as well. So
yeah, I appreciate that. Those are good names to be associated with.
Yeah, I mean, from a reading perspective, I mean, shameless plug, I have my own newsletter, waynemorris.me, and I post a lot on LinkedIn, as you know.
Sign up,
And
people.
I care a lot about helping early stage founders not make the same mistakes that I had to make, and early stage sales leaders not make the same mistakes that I make. I cross-reference a lot of the things that I'm doing in the field with my companies and what I've done in the past with venture capital guys who invest in SaaS companies. And there's a number of good ones out there, but the guy that I feel like a lot of my stuff is so closely related to, because it's enterprise and it's SaaS, and I do have a marketplace kind of bend on some of my experience as well, is David Sachs from Craft Ventures, former co-founder, COO of PayPal and CEO of Yammer. I think he speaks an incredible amount of sense around SaaS, and whenever founders are asking for reference points other than my own, I often point them in his direction.
I love it. Last question for you before we get to the last kind of stuff of where people can find you. Any favorite quotes or sayings or life philosophies you live by, anything like that stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I have the Sun Tzu's Art of War is, by the way, one of those books.
There we go.
And there's an incredible amount of quotes in there, most of which I struggle to recall. But whenever I'm looking for kind of life inspiration, I just flick through that and I'm just blown away. But yeah, I have a few. The life mantra that I live by is, you are who you surround yourself with, or you become who you surround yourself with. And I think if people are more cognizant of that, they, and really believe that, they would, they would think again about some things they do and where they live and what they do. And as an immigrant to the US now, looking back on the UK with a slightly different perspective, I'd say, if you get the opportunity to travel and live abroad, live in a different place, and you get the chance to look back on where you've come from, I think that perspective is really, really healthy. So I'm a very big believer in, you are who you surround yourself with. So when people say, when all these people are leaving California and leaving the Bay Area, I'm always thinking, well, I need to be sure who the people are I'm gonna end up being surrounded by wherever I go, because whether I like it or not, I'm gonna become them. That's one. Another one is I'm a really big believer in just kind of being trustful of others as my default start point. So I'm not trying to second guess people when I meet them. I'm really just trying to give them the benefit of the doubt all of the time, until of course I can't. I just think that attitude means that you can get off to a quick start and see people for who they are really, 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 really quickly, and I find that easier, and it serves me well. So that's one. I'm a really big believer in just treating people for who they are. So as a leader, it's hard to understand that, Tom, you're a unique individual that has your own unique things going on about you, and I need to treat you uniquely. When you're scaling companies, I think that gets lost a lot with people. But I think as a leader, if you can figure out how to make the time for Tom and understand who Tom is, at least for 15 minutes every single week, I think you're going to get paid back in bucket loads if you can do that. So I try really hard to let people understand and feel that I recognize them for the really beautiful and unique individual that they are, because I think that really unlocks their creativity and their ability to get to another level. And I just don't see it happening that often. I see people treated as cogs in the wheel, as moments in time. And my view is well, they're not actually, they're humans that have a personal life and a career. And, I'd love to be able to impact that positively, because I care about my legacy and I care about them. So treating people as individuals is a big one for me. And related to that, there's the Maya Angelou quote that always comes up about, people will never forget what you say or how you said it or what you did, but people always forget what you say or how you said it or what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a better mantra to live your life by, I've not heard it, but that's really, really important. You can be forgiven all sorts of stuff, but some things people just won't forget. So really make sure that you understand that the way you make someone feel is of critical importance. And obviously in sales, where is it more important? You can be forgiven. Honestly, in sales, you can be forgiven all sorts of knowledge gaps. You can be forgiven all sorts of mistakes if you make people feel good. But if you have all of the knowledge and you know everything about your subject and you make people feel like shit, you haven't got a shot. You're screwed. So doubling down on that is really important.
That's great. Wayne, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your wisdom and your time. Certainly everyone should go check you out on LinkedIn. It'll be easy to find you because you got the donut emoji up there in the headline. Check out Wayne's newsletter. Anywhere else that folks should try to connect with you or learn from you?
WayneMorris.me is my newsletter. My LinkedIn profile is a good place to go. If you feel like, having heard this, that maybe we should work together, then check out my website, WayneMorris.co. I'm not that active on Twitter, but I'm ramping that up. So Wayne G Morris. You can find me there too.
Awesome, Wayne. Thanks so much for coming on.
Cheers, Tom. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for checking out that episode of the Millennial Sales Podcast. We're in the home stretch, November and December of 2021. Let's close this on a strong note. Please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening here. They'll help me grow this show and provide better content for you. Otherwise, hit me up on LinkedIn, Tom Alemo. I'll see you there. Peace.